Okay, so this is a tutorial where we'll look at how you would go about 3D printing some terrain, and we'll use Maproom. We'll download some terrain and come this guy, and we'll find some terrain that's got a fair bit of variation. So let's do Grand Canyon. I'm pretty sure that's got a bit going on. And we'll update the space, go across to terrain, and then 150 kilometers is way too much. Let's do 4 by 4. Let's do 2000 pixels. Estimate zoom level. That all looks okay, and then we'll use the. I'll just use Bing. And to use the Bing aerial image, you need to hook up through the settings. You need to set up the API key, or you could just use the default maps it's got in there. So once you press update, it's going to take a little while because it's ripping the aerial image, but it's also pulling in this SRTM elevation data, and it looks something like this. And just so you know how that works, it's actually so that it's got a texture map on that. So if I click on that guy, so there's my material that's been applied, and it's they just use a standard material with a bitmap. So that's the aerial image. In addition to that, to distort this surface, it's using we use a Displace Modifier, and that is using a texture map, which is made up of a elevation map, and it's a bit hard to see here, but it's actually using an image that pushes the height up, but we might go into that in another tutorial. So this is looking pretty good. There's certainly a bit going on in terms of the topography. You'll notice that the edges are going a bit weird, and that's just that the mapping is right up to the edge, so it's kind of like a coplanar edge, I guess. We can fix that by just adding a little smidge of overrun on the mapping here. Let's go one, see if that changes it. Maybe I'll do a half meter. And over 4 kilometers, half a meter should be fine. Yeah, so that's neatened that up. You might be able to get away with smaller numbers, so maybe 0.1. So that's looking pretty nice. If we were to try and 3D print this, it's not going to work because it's just a surface. So we want to give it some sort of thickness. Before we do that, let's just have a look at how Maproom models this guy. It's got this Displace Modifier, so it's just a plane. And if I turn the edges on, you can see. So it's got this guy, Mesh Stem. It's actually a Turbo Smooth that's been renamed. And if we Turbo Smooth and then Displace, you'll get a good, quite a nice kind of finish on it. Sort of see that that's a bit bit rougher, not quite as nice. And so you probably do want the higher number here for when you do your 3D printing. I might just turn it down for the purpose of this demonstration because it does slow things down quite a bit. So that's not quite as severe. You probably do want a bit more there. Actually, what I could do is just increase the number here. Let's go 50 and 50, and I'll turn the Displace, the Turbo Smooth off so we can see what's going Okay, so that's not too bad. It's a little chunky, but it'll be fine. And then I can do a shell modifier. And so the shell, you can basically give it a bit of thickness, and it would depend on very much what scale you're wanting to print this, and what sort of printer you're using. Different printers have different kind of tolerances. They'll if they're too thin, they'll just be flimsy and break. So you'll have to do probably a bit of testing there. From there, you could stick some little feet on, so we could do little cylinders maybe. So little legs that might sit on, depending on what sort of printer you're using. It's quite a lot. I see, it's quite high up. So you might do some cylinder feet. So it's got something to kind of sit on to keep it flat. Or if, depending on what you're printing it on, another approach is to do a shell, but actually to kind of keep the shell thickness to 0, and then we select the let me just try and remember, I think it's the inner amount. Yes, so we want the inner, and then we can do an edit poly, select the sub-object, which is polygon, and then we can move this guy down, and it's then sort of thicken that guy up. And it's a bit like a shell, but what we can do from here, if I just push it down a bit further, in Edit Poly, somewhere buried in here, there's this Make Planar button, and if I click on Z, it will make all of those faces planar in the Z. So it'll have a nice flat bottom on it, and then I could push that up. I'll just do it by eye, something like so. You just want to kind of make sure that the thinnest bit is not too thin, and that's how you can make this. And I guess if you were wanting to save materials, you could you could select some of these guys, and you could do some extrudes, not that way, the other way. So kind of hollow it out a little bit, so it's not using as much of the material. So you could do, that could be another step that you go through if you're wanting to save material. And this will depend on how big this thing is. If it's a 50 by 50 millimeter thing, probably don't need to bother with that. Okay, so that's how you can solidify a topography for 3D printing. And then if you've got some buildings that are sitting on that, let's do something a bit smaller. To 3D print, and if you're using Maproom, you can play with the settings to get this pretty close, but sometimes you'll have the Maproom will kind of get a bit confused as to where the bottom of a building is, so it might be kind of setting something like that. That's not going to print super well, in that it's not overlapping enough, so you might just grab that guy and drag it down, or you could do an edit poly, and you could probably go into the side view and do this, but select your polygons, go into the side view, and you want to be on the right selection mode, and then you can drag that guy down, and it's okay if that's overlapping. The new Magic software and stuff will handle that pretty well. Okay, so that's 3D printing a terrain from Maproom.